It is, of course, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it's a day that people are approaching in their own ways, understandably. I mean, some people who were involved in the actual activism with MLK Jr. Talking about their experiences. It's a time to reflect on what was lost when he died, to reflect on his legacy itself, and for a lot of people too, to consider where we're at now and what has changed for the better and what has not changed for the better. In fact, some things that have gotten worse. And so there's a million, we've covered anniversaries like this before, and there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. And I have a few in mind, but of course we can talk about pretty much anything you want. One thing I did want to talk about was what he was working on when he was killed. And so in the weeks leading up to his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was preparing for what would have been his greatest demonstration, the Poor People's Campaign. King's coalition across racial groups, united in their fight to end poverty, aimed to recruit over 1 million people to occupy the National Mall, from Latino farmers' rights activists to white Appalachian coal miners. King's lesser-known dreams sought to bring disparate communities together in the name of economic justice. And to give you just a taste of some of the things that they wanted to push for, it was an economic bill of rights for America's poorest citizens, a $30 billion annual appropriation to fight against poverty. Obviously, that would be much more now. Guaranteed income legislation and the construction of 500,000 low-cost housing units each year until slums were eradicated across the country. And so very ambitious, obviously, on a topic that doesn't necessarily get talked about all that often when his legacy and his work is discussed. I mean, you even see some things that are decades and decades ahead of their time, like some sort of guaranteed basic income of some form, something that we're just now circling back to consideration of here and around the world. And so, look, very interesting. And we'll have a number of quotes and some interesting statistics about the areas that he worked in. But I like to think, man, imagine if he'd had that. Imagine if that could have continued through in the way that he had planned.
Yes, and of course, an assassin's bullet ended all that. So once again, poor people in the country were not represented, and the takeover of Washington, D.C. did not happen. Another lucky break for the powerful. So speaking of which, I want to read a quote from Dr. King. It's the next graphic here. He said about going to D.C. and bringing a, if they could, and knowing Dr. King's legacy and his accomplishments at the time, they probably could have. He said, "We ought to come in mule carts, in old trucks, any kind of transportation people can get their hands on. People ought to come to Washington, sit down if necessary in the middle of the street and say, we are here, we are poor, we don't have any money, you have made us this way, we've come to stay until you do something about it." What does that sound like? That kind of sounds like Occupy. So I bring that up for two reasons. One, the man was so far ahead of his time, it is astounding. Whether it's the guaranteed income that people are now finally talking about, all 50 years later, or the Occupy movement. And the second reason is he knew something that the mass media and our politicians have been avoiding for these last 50 years, which is that things don't happen by accident, that you can change the rules and the rules have all the effect in the world. So for example, on the issue of race, they changed the rules so that it allowed African Americans in the South to be able to vote. The Civil Rights Act made a giant difference. What was that? That was legislation, that was changing the rules to make it more fair and seek justice. And on the issue of income, it is the same situation. In fact, in a lot of ways, it is more clear. So they lower taxes on the rich. That's a rule, that's a law. They changed it. You could say they rigged the system on behalf of the rich and corporations. They just did it again, to the tune of trillions of dollars, right? And then you say, well, a higher percentage of taxes are going to be paid by the payroll tax. That's the one that you put in for Social Security and Medicare. Who pays that? The middle class pays that. That's how you rig the rules. Are you going to have more affordable housing? No, that's how you rig the rules. Are you going to have more deregulation for multinational corporations? Yes. So that's how you set the system. And what he was saying in that quote is, it's not an accident that you're poor. There is actually something we can do about it. So let's go and demand that our representatives represent us.
Yeah. The system piles weight on top of you and then makes you feel bad for bending over, basically. So there are some quotes that I want to read. Before I do that though, I do want to say one thing, because obviously we're remembering this particular individual because of obviously the 50th anniversary of his tragic assassination. But in the past, especially in the past few decades, a lot of people, a lot of them who look like me, remember him in a way that really does a disservice to both him and the movement that he represented. And there's a variety of different ways that happens. Obviously, there's the constant sanitizing of what he stood for, of the positions that he was a radical on, his views about other countries, his focus on not just segregation and racism, but also economic justice and things like that, his interest in environmental justice as well. So many different aspects of his own history get sort of washed away in remembering him. But then also people will remember him in a way that to some extent stresses too much one individual. Now, he deserves to be recognized, obviously, but he existed inside of the context of any number of other groups and individuals, some of which had been working and organizing and pushing for change for decades or a century or longer before he was alive. And he was a continuation of that. And so I do want to recognize some of these quotes, but we are not in any way trying to say that this is all that he was. He was obviously much more. With that said, here are some of the quotes that stood out to me. The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. No individual or nation can be great if it does not have a concern for the least of these. And so I definitely liked that one. He was not simply focused on the United States. Obviously, he understood not just how the system inside of the US has held back purposefully many here in America, but that we and other Western powers historically have done that to a great number of other countries as well.
One other quote that I'll paraphrase here, it's actually in one of our shirts that the Young Turks offers out there, because I loved it so much, is similar to what you were saying about him earlier. And it goes to the effect of, a man cannot ride you unless your back is bent. Not only did he have great dignity, but he had great strength. So he has been mischaracterized on purpose in a lot of ways. There's the hilarious thing of Fox News trying to take ownership over him, saying, oh, he was a Republican. Preposterous, right? And then saying, oh, he saw past race, so we shouldn't talk about race anymore. That's not what he said. And even in the I Have a Dream speech, he talked about the vicious racists down in Alabama. And he talked about brutal police actions and violent police brutality, which of course not only existed at the time as well, but was practiced upon him. And for them to say that Martin Luther King would have been opposed to Black Lives Matter is hilarious and totally counterfactual and counter-historical. Just read what Martin Luther King wrote and said, and it'll be absolutely obvious. But again, I want to emphasize the strength, because he didn't come beseeching, right? And yes, he was nonviolent, but he had tremendous strength in that nonviolence.
Yeah, that's true.
He demanded action. And so again, if you study the history of it, when Lyndon Johnson was slow to act, and also when JFK was slow to act, he brought down pain upon their shoulders through tremendous civil disobedience that shook them to their core. And so that's why I always, among the reasons why I emphasize nonviolence, because it is not, the right-wing ideology is, the only thing that is strong is war, violence, and conflict. That's not true. There is great strength in people like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. In fact, as of course King lived, it takes a lot more courage to take a punch than to throw a punch. And so it's an absolute pillar of strength. If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now, tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.